Chapter 40. The Meeting. A shocked silence fell in the Muriel 2 canoe. Just a short paddle away the Vengeance lay quietly at anchor in the early afternoon drizzle, still and steady in the middle of the river's deep water channel. The massive black ship was a striking sight. Its bow rose up like the steep side of a cliff, and with its tattered black sails furled, its two tall masts stood out like black bones against the overcast sky. An oppressive silence surrounded the ship in the gray light. No seagulls dared wheel around hoping for scraps. Small boats using the river saw the ship and hurried quietly along the shallow waters by the river bank, more willing to risk running aground than to go near the notorious Vengeance. A heavy black cloud had formed above the masts, casting a dark shadow over the entire ship, and from the stern a blood-red flag with a line of 3 black stars fluttered ominously. Nico did not need the flag to tell them whose ship it was. No other ship had ever been painted with such the strong black tar that Dom Daniel used, and no other ship could have been surrounded by such a malevolent atmosphere. He gestured frantically to Jenna and Boy 412 to paddle backward, and a moment later Muriel 2 was safely hidden behind the last bend of Deppen Ditch. "What is it?" whispered Jenna. "It's the Vengeance," whispered Nico. "Dom Daniel's ship. I reckon it's waiting for the apprentice. I bet that's where the little toad has gone. Pass me the eyeglass, Jen." Nico put the telescope to his eye and saw exactly what he had feared. There, in the deep shadows cast by the steep black sides of the hull, was the hunter's canoe. It lay bobbing in the water, empty and dwarfed by the bulk of the Vengeance, tied to the foot of a long rope ladder that led up to the ship's deck. The apprentice had kept his appointment. "It's too late," said Nico. "He's here. Oh, yuck. What's that? Ugh, disgusting. That thing's just slipped out from inside the canoe. It's so slimy. But it can certainly get up a rope ladder. It's like some gruesome monkey." Nico shuddered. "Can you see the apprentice?" whispered Jenna. Nico swept the eyeglass up the rope ladder. He nodded. Sure enough, the apprentice had almost reached the top, but he had stopped and was staring down in horror at the rapidly climbing thing. In a matter of moments the Magog had reached the apprentice and scuttled over him, leaving a trail of vivid yellow slime across the back of his robes. The apprentice seemed to falter for a moment and almost loosen his grip on the ladder, but he struggled up the last few rungs and collapsed on the deck, where he lay unnoticed for some time. Serves him right, thought Nico. They decided to take a closer look at the Vengeance on foot. They tied Muriel 2 to a rock and walked along to the beach where they had had the midnight picnic the night of their escape from the castle. As they rounded the bend, Jenna got a shock. Someone was already there. She stopped dead and ducked back behind an old tree trunk. Boy 412 and Nico bumped into her. "What is it?" whispered Nico. "There's someone on the beach," whispered Jenna. "Maybe it's someone from the ship, keeping guard." Nico peered around the tree trunk. "It's not someone from the ship," he smiled. "How do you know?" asked Jenna. "It could be." "Because it's Arthur." Arthur Mello was sitting on the beach, staring mournfully out into the drizzle. He had been there for days, hoping that someone from Keeper's Cottage would turn up. He needed to talk to them urgently. "Arthur?" whispered Jenna. "Princess!" Arthur's careworn face lit up. He wafted over to Jenna and enfolded her in a warm hug. "Well, I do believe you've grown since I last saw you." Jenna put her fingers to her lips. "Shh! They might hear us, Arthur," she said. Arthur looked surprised. He wasn't used to Jenna telling him what to do. "They can't hear me," he chuckled. "Not unless I want them to. And they can't hear you either. I've put up a screen screen. They won't hear a thing." "Oh, Arthur," said Jenna, "it's so lovely to see you, isn't it, Nico?" Nico had a big grin on his face. "It's great," he said. Arthur gave Boy 412 a quizzical look. "Here's someone else who's grown too," he smiled. "Those young army lads are always so painfully thin. It's nice to see you filled out a bit." Boy 412 blushed. "How nice now too, Uncle Arthur," Jenna told the ghosts. "I expect he was always nice, Princess," said Arthur. "But you're not allowed to be nice in the young army. It's forbidden." He smiled at Boy 412. Boy 412 smiled shyly back. They sat on the drizzly beach just out of sight of the Vengeance. "How's Mum and Dad?" asked Nico. "And Simon?" asked Jenna. "What about Simon?" "Ah, Simon," said Arthur. "Simon had deliberately slipped away from Sarah in the forest. Seems he and Lucy Gringe had planned to secretly get married." "What?" said Nico. "Simon got married?" "No, Gringe found out and shocked him to the custodian guards." "Oh no!" gasped Jenna and Nico. "Oh, don't worry yourselves about Simon," said Arthur, strangely unsympathetic. "How he managed to spend all that time in the custody of the Supreme Custodian and come out looking like he'd had a holiday, I don't know, although I have my suspicions." "How do you mean, Uncle Arthur?" asked Jenna. "Oh, it's probably nothing, Princess." Arthur seemed unwilling to say more about Simon. There was something Boy 412 wanted to ask, but felt odd talking to a ghost. But he had to ask, so he plucked up his courage and said, excuse me, but what's happened to Marcia? Is she all right?" Arthur sighed. "No," he said. "No?" three voices asked at once. "She was set up," Arthur frowned, "set up by the Supreme Custodian in the rat office. He's put his own rats in, or rather Dom Daniel's rats, and a vicious lot they are too. They used to run the spy network back at Dom Daniel's place in the Badlands. They've got a very nasty reputation. Came in with the plague rats hundreds of years ago. Not nice." "You mean our message rat was one of them?" asked Jenna, thinking of how she had rather liked him. "No, no, he got marched off by the rat office heavies. He's disappeared. Poor rat. I wouldn't give much for his chances," said Arthur. "Oh, that's awful," said Jenna. "And the messages for Miss Marcia wasn't from Silas either," said Arthur. "I didn't think it was," said Nico. "It was from the Supreme Custodian," Arthur said. "So when Marcia turned up at the palace gate to meet Silas, the custodian guards were waiting for her. Of course, that wouldn't have been a problem for Marcia if she had got her midnight minutes right, but her timepiece was 20 minutes slow, and she'd given away her keepsake. It's a bad business. Dom Daniel had taken the amulet, so I'm afraid he's now the extraordinary wizard." Jenna and Nico were speechless. This was worse than anything they had feared. "Excuse me," ventured Boy 412, who felt terrible. It was his fault. He had been her apprentice, then he could have helped her. This never would have happened. Marcia is still alive, isn't she?" Arthur looked at Boy 412. His faded green eyes had a kindly expression as, using his unsettling habit of reading people's minds, he said, "You couldn't have done anything, lad. They would have got you too. She was in dungeon number 1, but now—" Boy 412 put his head in his hands in despair. He knew all about dungeon number 1. Arthur put a ghostly arm around his shoulder. "Don't fret now," he told him. "I was with her for most of the time, and she was doing all right. Kept going pretty well, I thought, all things considered. A few days ago I just popped out to check on various little projects I have going on in Dom Daniel's rooms at the tower. When I got back to the dungeon, she was gone. I've looked everywhere I can. I even have some of the ancients looking. You know, the really old ghosts. But they're very faded and easily confused. Most of them don't know their way around the castle very well anymore. They come up against a new wall or staircase and they're stuck. They can't work it out. I had to go and get one of the kitchen midden yesterday. Apparently, it used to be the wizard's refectory about 500 years ago. Frankly, the ancients, sweet as they are more trouble than they are worth," Arthur sighed. "Although I do wonder if—" "If what?" asked Jenna. "If she might be on the Vengeance. Unfortunately, I can't get on the wretched ship to find out." Arthur was cross with himself. He would now advise any extraordinary wizard to go as many places as they could in their lifetime, so that as a ghost they were not as thwarted as he had been. It was too late for Arthur to change what he had done while he was alive. He had to make the best of it now. At least when he was first appointed apprentice, Dom Daniel had insisted on taking Arthur on a long and very unpleasant tour of the deepest dungeons. At the time, Arthur had never dreamed that one day he might come to be glad of it, but if only he had accepted an invitation to the launching party on the Vengeance. Arthur remembered how, as one of the promising young potential apprentices, he had been invited to a party on board Dom Daniel's boat. Arthur had turned down the invitation on account of the fact it was Alice Nettle's birthday. No women were allowed on the ship, and Arthur was certainly not going to leave Alice alone on her birthday. At the party, the potential apprentices had run riot and caused a great deal of damage to the ship, thus ensuring that they had no hope of being offered as much as a cleaning job with the extraordinary wizard. Not long afterward, Arthur was offered the extraordinary wizard apprenticeship. Arthur had never got the chance to visit the ship again after the disastrous party. Dom Daniel took her up to Black Creek for a refit. Bleak Creek was an eerie anchorage full of abandoned and rotting ships. The necromancer had liked it so much that he left his ship there and visited every year for his summer holiday. The subdued group sat on the damp beach. They gloomily ate the last of the damp goat cheese and sardine sandwiches, and drank the dregs from the flask of beetroot and carrot cordial. "There are some times," said Arthur reflectively, "when I really miss not being able to eat any more." "But this isn't one of them?" Jenna finished for him. "Spot on, Princess." Jenna fished Petrock Trelawney out from her pocket and offered him a sticky mix of squash sardine and goat cheese. Petrock opened his eyes and looked at the offering. The pet rock was surprised. This was the kind of food he usually got from Boy 412. Jenna always gave him biscuits, but he ate it anyway, apart from a piece of goat cheese that stuck to his head, and then later to the inside of Jenna's pocket. When they had finished chewing the last of the soggy sandwiches, Arthur said seriously, "Now, down to business." Three worried faces looked at the ghost. "Listen to me, all of you. You must go straight back to Keeper's Cottage. I want you to tell Zelda to take you all to the port first thing tomorrow morning. Alice, she is Chief Customs Officer down there now, is finding you a ship. You are to go to the far countries while I try and sort things out here." "But," gasped Jenna, Nico, and Boy 412. Arthur ignored their protests. "I will meet you all at the Blue Anchor Tavern on the harbor tomorrow morning. You must be there. Your mother and father are coming too, along with Simon. They are on their way down the river in my old boat, Molly. I'm afraid that Sam, Eric, and Ed and Jojo have refused to leave the forest. They have gone quite wild, but Morwenna will keep an eye on them." There was unhappy silence. No one liked what Arthur had said. "That's running away," Jenna said quietly. "We want to stay and fight." "I knew you'd say that," sighed Arthur. "It is just what your mother would have said. But you must go now." Nico stood up. "All right," he said reluctantly. "Well, see you tomorrow at the port." "Good," said Arthur. "Now be careful, and I'll see you all tomorrow." He floated up and watched the three of them trail disconsolately back to the Muriel tube. Arthur stayed watching until he was satisfied that they were making good progress along the Deppen ditch, and then he sped off along the river, flying low and fast off to join Molly. Soon he was just a small speck in the distance, which was when the Muriel 2 turned around and headed straight back toward the Vengeance.